My name is Rohit Sebastian, and I'm actually here to talk about two types of linguistic disorders, dysgraphia and graphorrhea. So first I'll begin with speaking about dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is actually can be said as a deficiency in handwriting found among children and young adults. So dysgraphia in a broader sense is actually not only about handwriting, but it's also the linguistic function that the brain carries and also the motor function that the brain carries, and also the impairment that it receives to the both that actually causes this deficiency in human beings. So etymologically, dysgraphia actually comes from the Greek word dys, meaning impaired, and graphia, meaning written by hand. So it's actually a writing disorder that's actually associated with impaired handwriting, orthographic coding, and also finger sequencing. So when all these three do not come together, it actually creates an erroneous handwriting styles or writing styles among certain youths and nations. So according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, dysgraphia can be defined as dysgraphia is a learning disability in the category of written expression when one's writing and motor skills are below a person's age. So a person taken against a peer group, when one finds that his writing ability is below par from that peer group, a person is said to be suffer from dysgraphia. Now dysgraphia has haunted many children, but the worst part is it is inability. Unlike dyslexia, dysgraphia is a bit more complex. So initially, even if parents find in children that they have dyslexia, they have this disease, they actually find dyslexia, they don't understand dysgraphia. Only upon further introspection and also research that actually parents and teachers and trainers actually identify dysgraphia from its source. Now dysgraphia is merely not just a child's problem. Like many children who face dysgraphia are actually called lazy. So it's not actually the child's fault. It's actually a basic motor inability in the brain. So what happens to the dysgraphic brain inside the human head? It's very interesting when we introspect into the dysgraphic brain, because the brain and the process of the brain in that is actually dependent, especially for dysgraphia, is on the angular gyrus. Now if you take the brain, especially in the case of dysgraphia, it is actually broken down into the linguistic segment and also the motor segment, which all coexist together in a praxis. So what happens here? It's in an expressive practice stage. Now the linguistic stage, if we take, it actually involves the encoding of auditory and visual information that comes from outside, and this actually goes to the angular gyrus, which is actually a region of the brain that is actually in the anterolateral part in front of the parietal tube. This is actually associated with the complex functions like reading, writing, listening, speaking, etc. So the main function of angular gyrus is actually to take the visual and auditory information from the outside world and make it processable and also comprehensible for the Wernicke part of the brain. The Wernicke part of the brain is also a very important part of the brain, because it is actually helps in processing information inside a human mind, which allows the person to actually act upon the understandable information. So the angular gyrus actually acts as a medium for this. So this angular gyrus is a very important part in human brain. Now what happens when this angular part has some impairments? Well, we get dysgraphia. And it is very interesting to accolade the researchers V.S. Ramachandran and Edward Hubbard, who actually have found that dysgraphia or angular gyrus has direct link with human understanding of metaphors. That is right. So anytime you see a metaphor in a poetry or in a textbook, it is actually thank your angular gyrus for helping you understand or comprehend this metaphor. And also another aspect. So So another aspect or stage would be the motor stage. As I had mentioned, the brain has a linguistic stage and also a motor stage. So the linguistic stage, as I mentioned earlier, is responsible for linguistic actions that a brain undertakes. While the motor stage actually, what you can say, makes it practical, or in fact enforces the linguistic information that the brain has received. And now what happens is that this aspect of the motor aspect of the brain is actually close to the Exner's writing area in front of the frontal lobe. So what happens in the Exner's writing area, as we all know, is responsible for the motor actions of the brain, I mean the hand. So what, like for example, how you grasp your pen, how you grasp a cup, how do you write, how do you make use of your fingers, your finger movements, etc. So now what happens among dysgraphic patients is that their incomprehension of the visual and auditory information that they receive, along with their inability to movement of their hands, actually cause illegible handwriting and also incomprehensible language to the readers. And this is actually not because of their laziness or lethargy, but it's because of this inherent deficiency that they face due to this disease. Now, if we break it down into three aspects, we can see that is our competence. We can see that is actually visual spatial component, fine motor component, and a language processing component. So in visual spatial component, we can see that a dysgraphic patient is not only able to write the language properly, but also he's able to do unable to perform simple tasks like tying one's shoes, etc., because he is not balanced in his visual and spatial component. So he is unable to differentiate between shapes and sizes and letters and symbols. So B seems D to him, D seems B to him, and this interchange happens, etc., and this causes chaos and confusion in his mind. He's not able to differentiate between symbols, and thus he is unable to perform tasks that are actually supposed to do with them. And also in the fine motor department, he is, for example, a dysgraphic patient is unable to catch the pen properly. So perhaps they might catch it too close like this or too far. They might catch it like this. They are not sure of how to catch the pen. They actually base their handwriting on their grip that they feel. So some dysgraphic patients write like this. And also in the form of letters, they actually try to write non-cursive letters that are actually more, very bland, but it's very confusing for them as well. The thing about the dysgraphic would be fatigue. So fatigue is also another important aspect that we should understand that happens due to this. As I mentioned earlier, when the person or the child actually keeps on writing according to his grip, they actually, as I said, have very impaired motor motions, which makes them tired easily. Thus, they face fatigue and do not feel to write more. In the component of language processing, they are actually unaware and rather confused about what to write. They actually face this dilemma and they are constantly unsure of what to write. Even if they write, they face some ramblings along the way and they drift off topic. So they actually face these impediments in their tenure. Now next would be the solutions for dysgraphia. How could you help dysgraphia? So example, in the case of individual spatial area, young children can be given papers that would have raised margins or borderlines. This would actually give them an idea of where to stop. Thus actually give them, aid them rather, in the sense of, structure and style. And also this could, upon practice, we can actually improve their handwriting and allow them to write within the lines of the given paper. And also graph paper is increasingly helpful for dysgraphic students. And also large spaces between lines would aid children, especially in their earlier stages, as this would help greater demarcation between sentences. And next important thing is that in case of the children, is to allow them to be comfortable with the tools that they use. So once the children finds that they're comfortable with the tool, it would be easier to help them recover from dysgraphia. In fact, Perhaps dysgraphic students, according to study, actually found to have the increased liking for thicker pencil with rubberized coating or grip. And upon using which they are actually able to write more, and this would help end dysgraphia. And another, in case of young adults, we could use language processors, which actually would use high-tech complex programs like voice to print software or voice to text. This would allow dysgraphic adults to write less and do more, and also help them in creating drafts, and them make them create their own drafts of their writings. Not much, don't make them write much, but they create their own drafts, and then later help them edit it so that they can understand their mistakes and move on. And also another last but important point would be the practice of cursive writing. So in the case of cursive writing, that would be allow them to minimize copying. That is, in your bland style writing, you have to copy B, C in separate fonts, but in cursive, and there's actually a stop while you write each letter. But in case of cursive writing, there's this enormous flow, and this would aid them to go right in a flow, and thus will not actually create an impediment, especially in the initial cases of dysgraphia. And also offering them time, as these children, as we know, require attention and help. So giving them time would help them to improve themselves. So the best example for any dyslexic, dysgraphic, or any children facing writing disorders, to give them time to catch up with the normal kids, because perhaps the time we give would help them succeed in life as well. That would be the end of first one. The second disorder that we would like to be speaking today, as I mentioned earlier, would be graphorrhea. Now graphorrhea is actually also under the also actually what you can say the sibling of dysgraphia, but they all come under agraphia, the main writing disorder. The graphorrhea is actually a communicative disorder expressed through excessive wordiness with minor or sometimes incoherent rambling, especially in written books. So what that means, in case of graphorrhea, as I mentioned, this would actually mean the person would be writing more, but it would be incoherent to others who read the ramblings. This could be a rambling sort of a poem that a person writes, or very, what you can say, obscure set of words that a person jots down on paper. Upon reading, one not understand what it is. If you actually try to analyze the person's brain based on this, one might not able to do so. But it's actually a form of writing. In fact, graphorrhea is mostly associated with schizophrenia, which is actually a disease that has many symptoms, including hallucinations, hearing voices, etc. But it's not in its accused. But many people think it was actually due to schizophrenia, but it actually has also other factors like aphasia, thalamic lesions, temporal lobe epilepsy, and mania. So these ramblings, or this incoherent bits and pieces of writing that they write on this paper, may actually follow some grammatical rules if that depends actually on the level of the graphoric problems that the person faces. But if it's too extreme, that may not even follow grammatic rules, it might simply be ramblings. Sometimes it might be worse in the other scenario, in the sense that they might follow grammatical rules, but the words, that is the alphabets, might be wrong, or the words will have incorrect spellings. So in fact, it is actually chaos and confusion. There is an incomprehension. Even the writer is not sure what he's writing about, so is the reader. This also is actually part of a linguistics deficiency, and also is affected by the brain. Similar, as I mentioned about dysgraphia, it is actually a similar process, but in another different way. So in this video, actually I've mentioned about two important disorders, dysgraphia and graphorrhea. Both of them actually affect seriously a person's or a child's handwriting. Now, if we as the community, as a research community, can identify these disorders, make them more aware, and conduct actually many researches upon this field, we will be able to find greater results which would help, actually aid or spark a light into a child's or suffering child's home. And thus, we can actually find a suitable solution that would improve the lives of many tormented parents and children. Thank you for watching.